Okay.
Yeah, warm welcome. It's Two Peas in a Podcast with Tim and Andy. It's fine Wednesday, 22nd of July. Gonna have a chat today about, well, actually, I'll read this headline. It's a very positive outlook on this gentleman. What's wrong with Professor Yang? Well, Yang has rapidly become one of the internet's most talked about commentators on geopolitics and history. His lectures are often compelling. They also he would argue, a lesson in how easily intelligent people can mistake explanation for proof. This is the author of this article, and he says, I've almost lost count of the number of people who have asked me about Jiang over the past few weeks, family members, friends, colleagues, and he's so excited, and he's very good, at giving lectures on geopolitics, Iran, Trump, World War III, and the secret societies that we talk about here, Tim. So, what's your
Mhm.
take on the gentleman?
Well, I found his lectures, and I've listened to about three, compelling. I mean, they're interviews, but he goes on at such length that it's more like a lecture, and then the interviewer gets to ask him the occasional question. I think Tucker was the best interviewer of him because he followed him and understood what he meant and what he was trying to, suggest extremely well. And I think Tucker is quite versed in world affairs across the planet. I was surprised to see that Professor Jiang's words resonated with Tucker about Korea and China. I wouldn't have expected Tucker to know a damn thing about Korea or China, but he is versed. He knows geopolitics extremely well. I have to give him credit. Of course, I know the Far East because I lived there and I worked for the Korea Herald in the news desk for about 3 years, and I worked for the Korea Times as well. And I know Korean history pretty well, and Chinese history not too bad, and Japanese as well. So Asian Far East civilization, I think I've got it pretty sussed. Um, what Professor Jiang had to say about Korea was very interesting to me. He was talking about how it's um, it's got a lot of nepotism, and that has always been a form of corruption whenever a country has too much nepotism. In fact, the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the Hindu scriptures, is about how Arjuna, the warrior, inspired by the god Krishna, who, like the Deus ex machina, descended onto the stage of the battlefield at Kurukshetra, and he inspired Arjuna to go into battle. He was hesitant. He didn't want to go to war against his own blood relatives, the Pandava family. But Krishna explained to him that, this problem of nepotism had infected the kingdom and had brought it to a state of ruin because too many people had gained positions of authority and power based on family connections and nepotism and not on meritocracy and ability. And Professor Jiang is claiming that in Korea, the problem is these chaebol families control Samsung and LG and all of the big corporations in Korea, and everyone wants to work for these monopolies, and there's no other place to turn if you want status and a good income in Korean society. So you've got all this competition to get into one of these chaebol companies. And to get there, you have to go to Seoul National University, or you're not going to get into one of these companies. And so, are you getting a good education at Seoul National University? Well, in the sense that you're going to have a well rounded knowledge of every subject, because you have to pass these college entrance exams, which means that even though you hate math, you have to study your ass off to learn math so you can pass the college entrance exam and get into Seoul National University. And you'll commit suicide if you don't get into Seoul National University because of the shame and the loss of face within your family, within your friend peer group, and all this kind of stuff. And don't tell me they don't. They commit suicide in Japan and Korea because of this Confucian system of education all the time. It's a big problem. And so these Korean families aren't having kids because all they're focused on is getting this status sorted out. They have to be at the creme de la creme point of view at this peak situation in their society, and they can't fail. They've got to get there. And so they're not having kids because there's so much money involved in educating your kid to get into Seoul National University so they can get into Samsung Chaebol Corporation. And so the population stats for Korea are looking desperate. It's another problem is they want a male child to carry on the family name, and according to the inheritance law, the firstborn male inherits the property. And if you have a female child in the Asian Far East countries, it's a detriment because you're going to have to probably pay a dowry to the family that you would like to marry your daughter off to, because to raise your family's status, she's got to marry a rich guy, and you've got to convince the family that she's a worthy bride. So how do you do that? You basically have to bribe the family. Sorry, that's how I see it. And so what you have is a plummeting birth rate in Japan, in Korea, and in China. And what is it going to say for the next generation? I mean, Elon Musk is big on AI and how AI is going to solve all these problems, and we're going to have a utopian future where we can just kick up our feet, have a 4-day week, relax, take it easy, and AI will do all the work for us. Well, I mean, is it really that luxurious? If you can't get a job and you can't earn an income and so forth, because AI has replaced you. Well, I mean, there's that, and then Tucker brought up the problem of how they're genociding white Christians in the whole Western Hemisphere, the whole Anglosphere. Absolutely true. I mean, here in Canada, all the people that have been murdered by the MAID program are all whites. Does it even get mentioned in the press, the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star? No, because they're part and complicit in the whole process. They want to get rid of whites. Why? I don't know. I think we've contributed quite a lot to civilization, frankly. I think a lot of the inventions, a lot of the discoveries, a lot of the great art has been accomplished by white people. But go ahead and murder us. Go and genocide us and get rid of us. Go ahead. I mean, you see what kind of a world you'll have tomorrow without us. Good luck. You won't have it easy, I'll tell you that. Not without the thinkers of the white race doing the thinking for you to guide the ship of world destiny. You're going to crash into an iceberg and sink like the Titanic. Trust me, you're going to go off a cliff. Anyway, yeah, so Andy, what do you think? I
Yeah, he
mean,
sounds a great guy. You know, he was a freelance journalist, and because of that, China wouldn't let him back in, but he stopped doing that, and he's now turned to YouTube. So that's the
well,
bit I know, and everyone calls him China's Nostradamus.
well, it's a bit of a overhype. He's pretty good, and it's all based on historical analysis and doing comparative studies, comparative research between what has happened pattern recognition wise throughout history and how empires have reached their apex and then headed straight toward a disaster at some point in their.
I hope he doesn't mind, but I was going to call him a Chinese David Icke because he's sort of similar in what they learn.
Yeah, except that
Some of it,
he
some of it.
avoids conspiracy theory altogether. All of his lectures that I've listened to, there hasn't been one single hint of anything conspiratorial in the narrative. He avoids it like the plague. Why? Because he's an academic and he knows that the first way he can destroy his career is by insinuating that there's anything conspiratorial going on. Not because there isn't, but because there is. And they will skewer him for blowing the whistle on what they're doing. And they'll just discredit him and say, oh, he's a conspiracy theorist and he's not rigorous. And that's the thing about academia. You have to show rigor, which means you have to have proof to substantiate your claims. And the problem with conspiracy theory in a lot of topic areas is there isn't sufficient proof to pass the academic litmus test. So, because of that, the whole field of conspiracy theory is discredited because they're accused of not being rigorous enough and to
But
just,
wouldn't that mean he's a conspiracy factualist because he brings out the facts?
well,
It's only a question.
it's on the right track what you're saying, but he couches it in a way that it just looks like market forces or it just looks like the natural course that geopolitical dynamics take rather than anything overtly conspiratorial. Although he does allude to the fact that America has a strategic aim in keeping its empire alive. And one of those strategies, although he doesn't couch it in terms of a conspiracy of American empire building, he puts it in a very academic context. But America has a navy and they have historically tried to control the choke points of the world. And these are the straits like the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran and America are now fighting over to gain control of the Strait of Hormuz. And that's a very, very important choke point because, you know, the Asian Far East depends upon the resources that come out of the Strait of Hormuz and then go through the Strait of Malacca all the way over to the Asian Far East. And if you block that choke point and they're deprived of the resources they need to run their industry, it's a disaster. And so, what does Korea need? What does China need? Well, oil. Significantly, China needs oil as much as it can get because they have to keep their industrial might going because that's what their whole economy thrives on. They are the factory of the world and they depend upon oil, a lot of it. And then, in addition to oil, Korea also depends on hydrogen. Sorry, helium. Is it hydrogen or helium he was talking about? Professor Jiang mentioned that the semiconductor industry depends upon, I think it's helium. And if that supply is cut off and doesn't make it to the Asian Far East, then the whole semiconductor industry is threatened by it. And obviously, the chaebol Samsung is going to suffer big time. And when you have these supply problems, it affects the entire supply chain. And so, he does mention the fact that, it's not just about not having oil for your vehicles, it's a matter of causing problems for the transportation of goods, including food products, which we depend on. And so, what we're talking about is a collapse of the supply chain if these choke points get throttled and the resources don't make it to their assigned destinations.
Yeah,
Now,
Qatar is a big supplier of helium, liquid helium, and they also supply a lot of these needles and jabs to the medical industry going to and from China and Europe. So that's why they need the straits open.
right. And then Professor Jiang does mention the fact that with these BRICS nations, they have their currency backed by gold. And so their aim is to try to create a more stable and secure currency instead of the fiat currency of the US dollar, which isn't based on any commodity at all. It's just paper and it's not backed by gold. And so, how stable is it? It isn't stable at all. It's just a massive Ponzi scheme. And so, they want to establish a more stable monetary unit and to attract investment by creating that more stable unit. And then he talked about how they want to unite Iran, Russia, and China through a through an Oriental Express, through a rail line that unites the three countries. And then by having their goods and services exchanged freely between the BRICS nations, they have eliminated America from the equation. The American Navy is now irrelevant because they have found a land bridge that avoids the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Malacca, and all of these choke points where they may encounter problems on the high seas. Forget about it. Who cares? We've got this rail link now that can allow us free reign and to provide each other with the needed resources that the BRICS nations depend on to thrive. And that's the point that Professor Jiang raised. He does see potential complications with all these scenarios because it's possible to sabotage rail lines. I mean, let's look at the history of Britain in India. They were driven out of India because the revolutionaries that were like Bhagat Singh that were bombing the railway stations and the rail lines to disrupt the British transportation network and ability of the British to mobilize with their supply line being provided by the rail system that they had built in India. They they disrupted this so that the British military couldn't function. And so once you've prevented them from getting their supplies, you've cut off their access to ammunition and their ability to mobilize. They're finished. You can just slaughter them at will. They have no defense, and so that's what eventually ended the British Raj. It was not Gandhi. I have written a book called Gandhi Under Cross Examination. In fact, Gandhi prolonged British colonial rule in India by 40 years. And he also vivisected the country along Pakistan and India border and ostensibly to give the Muslims their own homeland, but that did nothing to solve the Muslim problem because there's a Muslim minority in practically every Indian province. So how has it solved the problem? It hasn't. It's only exacerbated it and made Muslims and Hindus hate each other throughout the entire Indian subcontinent. And you get these attacks between them and skirmishes between the two groups all the time. And so far from being the father of modern India, he was actually a Freemason. He was also a recruitment officer for the British Army in the Boer War, World War One, and World War Two. So far from being a pacifist, a pacifistic leader that was looking for a peaceful solution to his nation's problems, he was just an opportunist and was, in fact, a British agent. He attended the Inner Temple, one of the Inns of Court in London, and it's a spy training facility disguised as a law school. That's essentially what it is. In fact, the Queen Mum was actually running the Inner Temple at one point during her life.
Maybe the corgis were there with her.
Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating, this journey through history that Professor Jiang has taken me on, because I can see echoes of what he's been talking about in these interviews in my own research down through my career. He brings up the influence of secret societies. He refers to the Knights Templar and the Freemasons. I think he even brought up the Jesuits briefly. But the role of secret societies is there. He has referred to it briefly, but he doesn't get into it, probably because he's trying to avoid the whole conspiracy topic area for the credibility of him as an academic. He doesn't want to shoot himself in the foot, and I can totally understand that.
It's almost things of what we've heard this particular website before belongs to someone else, but it's as if history's been hidden, and it's people like the professor that's bringing out the real truth in an understanding way that you'd understand, through his lectures.
Yeah, well, he has the advantage of being a transnational person. He was born in China, but he's ended up becoming a Canadian citizen. So he's got a foot in both camps. He's basically half Chinese and half Western, not from a racial point of view, but from a cultural point of view. And so am I. I went to Korea and lived there for 11 years. I lived in China for 1 year, and I lived in the Philippines for 2 years. So I'm half Asian. So there you go. I can totally relate to Professor Jiang because I've got a foot in both.
I must be totally Scottish then, even though I'm English. Yeah, it's good.
Well, you're a well-traveled man. You've been to many Middle Eastern and I think North
South
African
America and North
and,
Africa, yeah.
and Asian destinations in your travels, so you know the world pretty well.
It seems that we're divided into two. And I'd say that was probably somewhere near Dubai. Everything left of Dubai and everything right is normal. Everything left is the West, and it's all mad. That's the way I put it.
Yeah, well, it has become pretty chaotic, I have to say.
I mean, we joke about Chinese and certain Asian countries, but at the end of the day, they're more normal than we will ever be, I think. Well, apart from the obvious country that no point mentioning it today, but there are the odd country that has what you call the Muslim problem.
The what problem?
The Muslim problem.
Oh, well, go on. Tell me what you have to say about that.
Oh no, I mean most countries in the East are great. You get a few strange people in Pakistan and some Middle Eastern countries, but they're entitled to their opinion.
Yeah, I guess. But you know, the Pakistan Muslim grooming gang problem in the UK is something I can't countenance. I just don't understand how this was allowed to happen.
But it's our that's a separate issue. But the Muslim problem in the UK isn't always because of the Muslims to start with. I think it's our UK government over the years they wanted Muslims to fight the white people. Okay, the grooming gangs are yeah that they deserve what they get.
So, in other words, what you're claiming is that the corrupt, satanic, white establishment of Britain has groomed the grooming gangs. They basically set this up so that whites could be genocided in slow stages.
I think so. There's
I
evidence
agree.
out there.
I agree. I mean, it's appalling. I mean, none of these poor young women is going to be able to have a normal romantic or sexual relationship now until the end of their lives. Every time they get on their back and someone gets on top of them, they'll have these haunting post traumatic stress disorder, nightmarish visions in their head that will make them go, no, 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 no. And they'll be pounding on the chest of their lover to get off, get off, get off, get off. You bloody sod, get off, get off, get off.
Yes, it's very hard, because most of our population is Muslims at the moment. Oh, and asylum seekers and the boat people, which are no better. Wonder what Professor Jiang's take on all that is. Hopefully he accepts our invitation to the show.
Hopefully, I really don't know what the fate is that will befall white Christians in Canada, the United States, and Great Britain. I really don't know, but I would say that it's looking dire. And I think the only chance of survival is through interracial marriage between whites and the immigrant population. And so there won't be any whites in 2050 or perhaps 2100. There'll be half caste racial people that are mongrels, but it's better than the genocide of white Britons to see that as, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, but that probably would cause the same effect because then everybody will start looking like Muslims, so they have got rid of the white people.
Well, I mean, regardless of whatever religion the UK ends up embracing in the future, and frankly, I don't think it's going to be Christianity, and I don't think it's going to be the Islamic religion either. I think Britain is going to embrace the one world Gaia religion, the earth worship religion that deletes Jesus from the whole Godhead debate. Goodbye, Jesus. There is no Jesus anymore. They'll eliminate him with the earth religion, the one world religion of the future. Now, I don't know if that religion will be embraced by the rest of Europe. I wouldn't be surprised if we also followed this earth religion in Canada. As for the United States, I have a suspicion they're going to retain their predominantly Christian religious orientation.
Mm.
But what do you think, Andy? What would you say would be the probable end result over there?
Everybody should escape as quick as they can, and then and enjoy life while you've got it, because worrying about life in the future is gonna make your current life bad. So you might as well just enjoy.
What about the doom and gloom? I was listening to an economist today, and in his interview, he was suggesting that we're only 3 months away from a famine. I don't think that the supply chain is going to collapse to that degree. I mean, they may threaten to disrupt the supply chain, one faction or another, but I really don't think it's going to collapse. I think there's going to be a situation where vested interests will see that it's not in their best interest to allow for that supply chain crisis to take place, and so they'll take steps to ensure that it doesn't happen.
Let's hope so. Yeah. I mean, the current crisis has caused a little bit of the petrol going up, the diesel going up, a bit of food goes up. But our government's been quite reasonable by taking VAT and taxes off certain foods and petrol now, and electricity. So it's sort of counters one out.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay.
That's what's happened at the moment. So we're not feeling any pinch. The only pinch
I
we're feeling is, is from Russia, like 2 or 3 kilometers from UK waters, doing their drills day and night to wind us up.
well, we know that during World War II there was rationing. and that was necessary. I wouldn't be surprised in this scenario that's bordering on a World War III. It hasn't got to that point yet, but it's bordering on that. Yeah, there's probably going to be rationing. I mean, let's be rational. It does stand to reason that if your supply chain is affected and the military needs to have its supply chain, you've got to start rationing to make sure there's enough to go around.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've got about 2 minutes left. It goes quick, don't it?
Yeah. Well, the last thing I wanted to say was that I could also resonate with Professor Jiang's life story. We've had some similarities in our life experience. He's an academic, I'm an academic. I have had a tortured path, and so has he. And he talked about how people like him must live a tortured life because it's that which informs the intellect to make the deductions and the insights and the discoveries that he has made. Quite true, because that's exactly how I came to many of the same conclusions that he has. So, yeah, I mean, how can you write about the, plight of the suffering multitudes across the planet if you don't in some way share their suffering? The empathy that's required to delve deep into their plight must come from you being a companion sufferer. Misery does love company after all. I need to understand them. The only way of doing so is to be denied the privilege of my peers who do very well. And do they give a damn about those people? Not really. They're doing very well, and so why should they even think about it? Why should they trouble themselves? That's the problem with privilege. And he's quite right in bringing that up in his interview. The interview that I heard him give with Tucker. Okay, I love this podcast very much, Andy. It was great. I didn't get on to the time stuff, so let's save that for Sunday.
Yes, that'll be brilliant. So